Welcome to another international podcast on MetallWoche. I'm very glad to have Gerald Celente from Kingston, New York, back in our show again. Gerald is director of the TrendsResearchInstitute and publisher of the TrendsJournal. Many consider him as one of the top trend forecasters in the world. Welcome back to our show, Gerald.
Oh, thanks for having me back, Michael.
Gerald, if there's a time where we really need a view out of your catbird seat, it is now. There's so much going on in the world. What are your thoughts and where are the main spots you are focusing on?
Well, the main spots, there are really two of them, geopolitical and economic, and they're all tied together. We just saw what happened in Cyprus, for example. That affects the entire Eurozone, even though it's 0.2% of the GDP of the Eurozone. And then we're looking over in Italy with the inability to form a government and what's going on there with the five-star movement. And then in Germany with the new movement as well of the, as they call them in the United States, the elites of, it's funny, when PhDs come out against the government and what they're doing, then it's okay. But when just the average person comes out against what they're doing, they're called radicals.
Yes.
So we're looking at those events because, and then of course what's going on in Spain with all of a sudden exposing the royalties, the royal frauds that they are, because it's much bigger than that. It's when you look at the discontent with government and you look at what's going on economically, it's all tied together. If there was ever an off with their heads moment, it's starting to heat up now. And then you go over to Egypt. What a wonderful time over there. The economy is unraveling. John Anthony West, who's renowned for his work on the mystery of the Sphinx and, of course, is the executive editor of the Trends he just came back from there. And he's been going there for about, 30 years or more. And he's amazed. He's so troubled by the decline of the economy there and how poor things are getting when they were poor before. And then you see what's going on now with Bahrain and Qatar and Saudi Arabia, how they're really coming down on dissidents. And that's, I guess, the other word that they would use for people that don't agree with the government if they don't have a PhD, they're dissidents. And they're throwing them in jail for criticizing the king or the emir. And then you go over to the United States and the problems that we have here economically. I'm a guy that grew up in the Bronx, in Yonkers. And I know what life looks like in this country. I'm no kid, in my mid-60s. Mm-hmm. And I have to tell you, the decline here is as rapid in so many different ways in the terms of a society really digressing, socially, spiritually, economically. When you look at the facts, and that's all I like to really talk about, the rest is speculation, and I don't do that. The jobs that have been lost since the Great Recession began, the fact of the matter is, Michael, they're all high-paid, very well-paying, I should say, middle-class jobs. Those were the ones that were lost. The jobs that are now being created are in the so-called service sector. So hospitality, hotel, cleaning up rooms and waiting on tables and healthcare for the elderly, which of course is a well-needed occupation, particularly with an aging baby boom population, but they pay them on average under $10 an hour.
Yes.
So they're not making any money. So what we're looking at is an economic downturn. At the same time, geopolitical tensions are increasing. So you look for the United States, for example, with its brilliant new strategy, after losing miserably in Iraq, causing a disaster in Afghanistan with no exit strategy or anything to leave other than a trail of death and destruction behind them. And now they come up with another two brilliant concepts. How does Pivot Asia sound to you? Does it ring well? Who could make up this stupidity? I'll tell you who. The same military that now has AFRICOM. That's right, 35 countries the United States has influence now in Africa. Oh, and I forgot Mali. That wonderful French Sudan trip that they can't get over. Remember, they were supposed to be out of there in weeks. Now it's months. It will stretch into years. And of course, as we know, Mali last year mined over 50 tons of gold, up from 43 tons the year before. And it borders, of course, Niger, which is rich in uranium but dirt poor. And of course, France has 75% of its energy is nuclear powered. So, and then you have, of course, the Korean debacle. You have a guy that's clearly out of his mind there, but no more than out of his mind than anywhere else. And the point being is, what is the United States doing in all of these foreign countries? Everything that they're doing economically and geopolitically is totally opposed to what this nation was founded upon and what the founding fathers believed in.
I know that you are watching China as well, and you warned a couple of times ago, and it's quite often, that you think that things are getting tricky there in China as well. Recently, we heard a word out of China from Banque Société Générale. Quote, given Beijing's goal to restructure the economy, a relatively moderate economic growth is not a bad thing in the long run, and this could help policymakers focus more on the quality rather than on the speed of the economy. End quote. I think that is a brilliant statement. What's your thoughts here?
I agree 100%. It's a brilliant statement. And this stupidity of continued economic growth at unsustainable levels is something that has been made up by mad men and mad women, as far as I'm concerned. It's an inorganic process to have continual growth in anything, and the economy is part of that anything. As you know, in the winter, there is no growth. In the autumn, it slows down. In the spring, it starts to bud, and in the summer, it begins to bloom. It's the same thing with our lives. Anything organic. The organic process does not sustain perpetual growth. And this is the smartest statement I've heard coming from anyone in the longest time. This is a time for retrenchment. It's a time to build what you already have and solidify it. It's a time to get rid of the weak parts and bring in the other elements of strength that could sustain the economy long term. So to me, this is really a very smart move because, as you well know, Michael, and of course you could disagree, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but as I see it, what China has done is really no different from what the Bank of Japan is now doing with its $1.4 trillion worth of so-called stimulus, what the QEs have done in the United States with the quantitative easing by, buying up $85 billion worth of mortgage-backed securities and treasuries each month,
Sure.
or what they're doing in Europe with the ongoing monetary transactions, long-time refinancing operations, and the endless buying up of bonds. So China did the same thing, but just differently. They spent their money to stimulate the economy by juicing the domestic economy, and now that has caused a bubble.
But as you know, a single picture sometimes worth 1,000 words to describe a situation. I saw a cartoon picture a couple of days ago, I don't know where I found it, showing a man sleeping on a park bench. His body was only covered by some sides out of a newspaper, and they had the following headlines: stock market surges to record highs and corporate profits soar. Gerald, we see widening wealth gaps. We see that the household in the States on food stamps, on record highs, and we see social unrest, which are happening in Europe as well. Where are we heading?
Again, that's what I said. If there was ever an off with their heads moment, it's starting to heat up. The gap between the rich and the poor is the widest in the United States than any of the industrialized nations. Remember, this is the country that people wanted to come to from around the world to get a shot at moving up to the middle class and becoming anything that you wanted to become, and your future was yours. Not anymore. It's a total takeover. We used to have a very, very quaint little thing in this country. There were such things as hardware stores. But now, of course, all we have is Lowe's and Home Depot, a complete monopoly. There was a thing called pharmacies. Now we have CVS and Walgreens and Rite Aid. Rite Aid for who? Not for the pharmacists that used to belong to the neighborhood and the community and opened up their own pharmacies. They're gone, by and large. And then we had another quaint thing as well. We had stationery stores. One right here down the block from me in Colonial Kingston, New York, O'Reilly's. Oh, and you could get anything there in so many different varieties. No longer. Now we have Staples. They've stapled everything together between them and Office Depot. It's a takeover. The merger of state and corporate powers, by definition, is fascism. And it's happening in the United States in front of everyone's eyes. You saw those numbers that came out. The billions of dollars that these so-called hedge fund people, heads, made last year. In the billions. Who ever heard of hedge funds when we were growing up? Who ever heard of private equity firms? This is new. It's a takeover. And it's not only a takeover in the United States, it's globally. And as you well know, that other wonderful piece of language that they love to dump on the people is when the economies go down and the countries have to bail themselves out. They've come up with a lovely term called privatization, which means taking valuable public resources and selling them to their buddies on the inside at a cheap bargain basement price.
Exactly. Just if you think about what's going on in Portugal, where they are selling the water. So, Gerald, in this circumstance, very often I hear this, that people don't like if we get a little bit louder. But I think that people maybe should have to wake up. Sometimes I guess we have to give them a wake-up call, which where the real cause of anger and the waves of anger should be other than us getting a little bit louder. I know this when I watch your trends in the news, that there's a problem the same in the States. If you put the finger in something, people criticizing us for it. But I think if you watch Guantanamo or other things, I think there is a time to get a little bit louder, or not?
I mean, it's ridiculous. Here's what I say. If Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, could become violent and pick up a whip to drive the money changers out of the temple, I could become angry. And there's a point when you should become angry. I'm a close combat practitioner. When your life is being threatened, you better be angry. And my life is being threatened. My life is being threatened with the poisons that they're dumping into the air. The poisons that lace our food and water. The wars that are being waged by psychopaths and sociopaths. You bet I'm angry. And I'm disgusted with these people that bow to the higher authorities of their chancellors and presidents and prime ministers. I am sick and tired of seeing my money wasted on red carpets being rolled out for a bunch of political flunkies. And all of these soldiers dressed up like clowns, saluting their commanders and chiefs of this and that. This is supposed to be democracy and equality. It's lost. And what I'm angry about more than that are the people that criticize, that don't have the courage, the dignity, and the respect to stand up and fight back. Instead, they get beaten down and they keep voting for their same torturers. It's one big Stockholm Syndrome, as the way I see it.
Gerald, we cannot finish here without talking about the recent developments in gold and the silver markets. On Friday and Monday, there was gargantuan volume in the paper gold market. On the COMEX, more than 1 million contracts changed hands over those two trading days. These current environments and circumstances are very different to the time of the 1980s. I know that you are a long-time buyer in gold, and you are in gold for the long term. Can you give us a bit of your experience out of these old days, and what is the main difference today, please?
I began my first buy of gold, Michael, was in 1978 at $187.50 an ounce. And I also bought on the highest day, too, in January of 1980.
Oh, that was you?
Yeah, that was me. I bought it at 75.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the highest point in the trading day before it began to collapse. So, I was a young guy. I didn't know what I was doing. The whole thing was brand new. And that's the point. Back in the 1980s, the silver market, for example, it was controlled by the Hunt brothers in Texas.
Correct.
In 1980, there was no Russia. It was the Soviet Union. China, the only thing people knew of China was Mao Zedong. And India, they heard of Gandhi, but that was about it. Didn't know much of that. There was no global economy back then. There wasn't heavy trading coming out of Europe. There wasn't heavy trading coming out of Japan. Most of the trading was in the U.S. The markets were very thin, as they are now, by the way. They're still thin markets. But it's a whole different geopolitical scene. I have made this 100% clear. And as you well know, you could go to our website, TrendsJournal.com, look up our forecast page, and there it is in black and white. I call the beginning of the gold bull run when gold was at $275 an ounce. This is a very different emotion. I believe and here's the reason why. I never bought gold because of fears of inflation. I bought gold for fears, not fears, but realities of devaluation of currencies. So, for example, we spoke about what Bank of Japan is doing, what the ECB is doing, what the Federal Reserve is doing, and what China is doing about pumping all of this money into keeping their economies going. They're debasing their currencies. And the only reason why the debasement hasn't been felt is because so many nations and groups are doing it. But it's a debasement. So here's why I buy gold. Let us suppose you live in Zimbabwe and you're holding Zimbabwean dollars. Demand for the product, let's say a pound of coffee, hasn't gone up. The price of coffee is the same. It's not a supply and demand issue. The issue is that your currency has been devalued, and it's going to take more Zimbabwean dollars to buy that coffee. So when people are talking about a deflationary spiral right now, yes, that may be true in some aspect, but it's also a deflationary spiral in what the currency can buy. So I'll give you another example. When they called a gold holiday, a bank holiday in the United States rather, in 1933, what they did was they also forced people, as you well know, to turn in their gold to the government. Correct. I believe the price was, I think it was $20.65 or $25.60 something cents. I forgot right now. After they got in all the gold, they repegged the price of gold to $35 an ounce. In fact, with the number translated to is you lost 70% of your purchasing power. It was a devaluation of the currency. And that's what I see going on. I am in gold, and I remember the panic feeling, by the way, very well back in the 1980s. I don't have that feeling now. It's not panic to me. Yeah, they're knocking a lot of people out of the markets with these naked shorts and all the people that were playing the markets. Mm-hmm. But for me, I'm in this long term, and I feel very comfortable having gold. And anyone that doubts the value of gold, let's pretend for a moment that you're a Greek Cypriot and the banks are closed for nearly 2 weeks and you can't get any dough. The ATM machines are empty and there's no cashier to cash your check. Don't you wish you had some pieces of gold and silver? You think you could buy what you needed or wanted in Cyprus when the banks were closed for nearly 2 weeks? Not only could you buy what you need or wanted, I bet you could get a real good price for it as well. And that's what I see happening.
I agree, Gerald. Last question. What you just mentioned, I guess it is really a paper game, but on every COMEX transaction on gold, for every seller, there has to be a buyer. So the big question, in my opinion, is who was on the other side of this tidal-wave trade?
I don't know. But I would not be surprised if it's people like the Chinese and India and Brazil and other countries that are looking to build their gold holdings for their central banks. And I bet there's a lot of speculators in there too that are behind the scenes that are shorting it and buying it.
This was Gerald Celente, director of the Trend Research Institute and publisher of the Trend Journal. Gerald, thank you very much for joining us on MetallWoche again.
And thank you so much for having me, Michael. All the best.
All the best to you.